on in the nuclear world. One thing I'll point out is, so what I'm going to give you is a talk. I kind of worked through a talk I gave back at Iowa State University, my alma mater, back in May. The reason I'm giving you that talk is I don't want to put anything through our public release review thing right now. Things are getting wonky. Namely, in that I changed, it used to be for carbon free or decarbonization. It got pivoted recently. So I don't know if you guys are familiar with the U.S. National Laboratories. We all kind of got our birth out of what was the Manhattan Project back in the 40s, the making of the bombs. There's 17 of us. We all kind of do what I call kind of the more difficult problems that the country faces. We have we're kind of a bridge between university research and industry. The universities do typically the fundamental cutting edge stuff. We do the longer term, bigger investment projects that support mainly the DOE, U.S. Department of Energy. There's also a lot of defense work in here. So DOE is broken up into different programmatic offices. The biggest one is the Office of Science that does a lot of basic energy research. And it stewards a number of these laboratories, including us, Argonne National Laboratory in Chicago, Oak Ridge National Laboratory, a few of the other ones. You probably heard of SLAC and then Jefferson Atomic Power Labs. A lot of those are science. A couple of them are defense labs, Savannah River, Los Alamos, Sandia, Lawrence Livermore. They really support the U.S. defense mission, a lot of that work. And then we have Idaho National Lab, which is stewarded by DOE's new Office of Nuclear Energy. We all work together. There's a lot of overlap in what we do, but really it's long-term R&D trying to bridge that gap and to give the U.S. kind of a leg up. Real quick, who we are. PNNL, we're one of the 17. We got our start in the 60s. We're actually having our 60th anniversary this year. We came out of the Manhattan Project, which was the U.S.'s defense production out on the Hanford site. Started in the 40s, ran through mid-90s in defense production. It's now a big cleanup effort. Our main work when the laboratory got started was supporting the Hanford mission, doing fuel development work, doing clean waste vitrification, doing a lot of stuff for that mission. And then starting kind of in the mid-90s, we started diversifying and doing other stuff. So our nuclear background comes from that, and it both in civilian energy and national security. But right now we've got main campuses in Richland. So if you've ever been, you guys haven't been there, I know that. We're on the southwest east side of the state. Dry as a bone, rain shadow. If it's green, it has a sprinkler. We do have an office down off of Lake, Stock Lake Union over there all day today. We've got a marine science laboratory out in Swim Bay. We do a lot of kind of ocean work. And then got offices in Portland. We've got people all over the place. But we're about 60, this is older, so we're about 6,400 now. And, we talk the money, we're doing about $1.5 billion with R&D coming through a year. And about 2,000 peer-reviewed pubs a year. I think this is a year ago's data, so this is probably 23. But you can kind of see what we do, scientific discovery. And then we do a lot of energy and environment work and a lot of national security work. We're an Office of Science laboratory, so I said stewardess. In the real basic energy work, we do probably about 20% of the 1.5 goes up here, the rest of it's applied. These guys are a pretty big engine. They do a lot of national security type work. In our directorate, I sit in the Energy and Environment Directorate, and you kind of heard all the above energy. That's what we're about. So we got folks that do work on, looking at the grid. How's the grid responding as we're growing demand on it? We're switching from kind of the spinning turbine type electricity generation to more discrete, more distributed, and different kinds of that. So we do a lot of work on the infrastructure of that, a lot of work in emergency response, and how that works. Fires in California, hurricanes in the South, deep freezes in Texas, where you hear these grids go down. We're doing a lot of work on kind of the resiliency of it and how do we respond to it. We've done a lot of work in energy efficiency and renewable energy. A lot of the work in buildings, making buildings more efficient to drive down the demand cost, and then as well as a lot of wind, solar, hydro. Environmental management, they're doing the cleanup up in Hanford right now. They're kind of the outlier, energy cleanup. Some work on kind of carbon management and fossil energy. To date, a lot of that work's been on carbon sequestration. Actually the basalts that underlie most of the state on the east side are really good for just putting carbon down there, and it'll mineralize down in the rock formation, and you can put it down there. We also do a lot of work on techniques for capturing. And then on my side, I steward our nuclear power regulatory group. So we support both the DOE Office of Nuclear Energy as kind of an advocate of nuclear energy, doing the R&D to help enable it. Then you got the regulator that oversees the licensing and operation of the nuclear power plants in the U.S. and we support them as well. So we kind of got we're kind of on both sides of it, helping out where we can. In my program, which I get the pleasure of stewarding kind of the civilian nuclear energy R&D at the lab, program development work, sponsor relations, trying to match the capabilities we got with the needs of them. We're about sustaining and extending the life of our current fleet. It's about 95 reactors operating in the U.S. right now. And we're supporting both the NRC and the DOE at doing what we can to keep that fleet afloat. About 20% of our electricity. It's about 60 to 70% of our carbon-free generation in the country comes out of nuclear. So you take those plants off, what are you going to replace them with? So we're doing a lot with that. We're also working on accelerating the domestic deployment of the advanced reactors. And I'll talk a little bit about what those are, and also the innovative technology that goes with it. If you look at nuclear, it's not just the reactor. You got to have a fuel supply for it. You've got to have a back end for it. You got to have a supply chain for it. So it's the reactors and everything around it. And really where our laboratory is strongest, and that's the everything around it. And we do a lot of work on that. One of the other areas is safe storage, transportation, disposal of spent fuel. It's been a problem that's been vexing our country since the inception of nuclear. There's nowhere to put the waste. So we do a lot of work supporting DOE on what are options, where do you want to go, how do you want to implement your program. And you asked about recycling earlier. That's one of the options to that. So we are doing some R&D supporting DOE on looking into what you could do to recycle fissile material from the radiated fuel, but do it in a way that doesn't make it what they call proliferation risky, so that the real fissile plutonium can easily be taken out and made into a weapon. We're trying to do it so it's diluted, it's got other crap in it, it's just set up so that it can burn in a reactor, but it's not going to make anything that can really be used as a weapon of mass destruction. Looking for ways to how nuclear could fit into the realm for deep decarbonization. I should fix it, but that's what we're doing. So it can contribute in a variety of different ways. And I'll talk to those. And then just trying to get our U.S. nuclear industry globally competitive again. The supply chain went away when it stagnated in the 80s and 90s. Most of it's overseas. Russia and China are going like gangbusters to build and deploy and make these geopolitical connections with countries where they would deploy their machines and have that, 50, 60, 70-year connection. We want to get our technologies out there as well. So where are we seeing the trends go? A lot of folks want carbon-free electricity. The state of Washington, absolutely. We're supposed to be carbon-free by 2050. Driving that is a big drive toward electrification. Electric cars, electric everything in your house, electric this, electric heaters and steel mills, you name it, they're trying to electrify it so that they can kind of get the carbon on it. Also use it to generate hydrogen. Huge hydrogen fuels for potential heavy haul trucks, trains, boats, you name it, driving on hydrogen, as well as other alternative fuels, fuels that could be out there that could be more carbon neutral. That's driving it. And we're wanting to do it fast and big. The demands are growing. We're seeing data centers come online. We're seeing AI stuff come online. We're seeing the onshoring of supply chain and other manufacturing that we're trying to bring back. All that has energy demands. So that's driving it. As an example, one I'll give you is in the Tri-Cities, we've got a southern end of the part of the Hanford site that wasn't contaminated. So the government is giving lease to that land back to the community, and they're trying to develop it as kind of a clean energy park, clean technology park. One company that wants to build there is a Danish company called Atlas Agro, and they want to build green fertilizer for agriculture. And everything they want to do is green. What they want to do is green, including the power. They need 350 megawatts. That's as much as the city of Richland uses. So you got that one plant's going to use our town for the power. So how are you going to get that? And you're seeing it up in Moses Lake on the other side where they want to build data centers. You're seeing it in the Midwest where they're wanting to pop things up. So the demand's pulling this hard, and somehow we want to meet all these goals and do it quickly. So huge amount of work going into it. One I like to show is national energy projections. These are a bit dated, but you see they're projecting overall demand to go up. They're thinking we're going to do it with solar. We're going to do it with wind. Natural gas may stay flat. Coal's going away. But they're saying nuclear is going to go flat. So that's the projection out of the U.S. Energy Information Agency. It's a couple years old, 2023, but I think the latest has shown the same. I personally want to see that go up. But at a minimum, like I said earlier, so we got 95 plants running and they're doing that. If these go down, what are you going to replace it with? And that's a big question. So that's the drive to try to keep this thing flat at least, and then hopefully get it to grow. Our electricity infrastructure has also gotten, okay, get rid of these things up here.
Okay. Zoom, probably.
I'm trying to figure out where my mouse is. That's just mirroring. I think we're stuck. Oh, there it is. Let's do that.
Perfect.
Can I kill that? There we go. So we're also seeing a huge transition in what we're expecting out of our electricity infrastructure. Way back last century, it was all about keep the lights on, keep the lights on, keep the lights on. All it did, people expected to walk over, flip their light switch, the power's going to come on. Didn't care where it came from, but that was it. But now it's keep the lights on. It's be resilient when it gets cold, hurricanes hit. Be clean, be cyber secure, be economical, be physically secure, be accessible to everybody, and be flexible. There's a lot of things we're looking to do with it. So we've got all of this electricity stuff beyond what that we've got to go. So we got to grow it. And it's got to do all that. Oops. Click. Oh, I'm got to get back over here. How do I do that? Where's my mouse? No, I just killed it. Oh, shoot. Went to the hot corner. Did it again. Love technology. There we go. So there were two pieces of legislation that came out under the last administration that drove impacts. The Infrastructure Investment and Jobs Act put a lot of major investments, innovation, and energy infrastructure deployment. So that got things going. The Inflation Reduction Act really put a lot of tax incentives for clean energy adoption. And what we were seeing up to that was a lot of the existing reactors were getting challenged economically. And back when I was your age going through school, the nuclear is very capital intensive to build and very cheap to operate. The fuel and the operation is relatively cheap. Big expensive plants to build, cheap to run. So what started happening is even plants that had been built and they older plants and they'd recovered that investment, they amortized the plants and got their investment back. And we're just running on fuel costs. Everything should be cheap. They should be making money, cheap, affordable power. They ran into trouble with natural gas. So in about 2006-07, everybody was projecting that there was going to be huge demand growth. So there were a lot of people, a lot of companies looking to possibly deploy new nuclear. So there was a lot of licensing actions, a lot of work done. There were going to be a number of plants. It was going to be the nuclear renaissance. At that time, the recession hit in 2008, slowed growth, demand actually flattened. And so there were a lot of flattened a bit. So it pulled back a lot of those new licensing actions. And they also figured out how to do hydraulic fracturing for fracking for gas. A lot of gas came on the market cheap, stuff they couldn't get before. That kind of took the wind out of the sails of nuclear power. People are like, well, heck, I can go build a gas turbine. Heck, a lot cheaper to do that. So that was a pivot. So that renaissance just died. And even after that, a lot of companies were still not being able to compete on the open market with gas and recognizing they were carbon free and had a lot of good jobs. State started first and then the federal government picked it up to have a kind of a credit program that if you're troubled economically, you could go in and say, look, make us break even. And the government would throw in some money to give them tax breaks, give them whatever to help them stay afloat. So I said this was a piece of work I did for when I was back in Iowa. So, but I think it's really relevant to here. So if you take the two states, Iowa, Washington got the Clean Energy Transformation Act in 2019. We by law, state law, have to be carbon free by 2045, 100% clean. This is what we're aiming for: no coal, then greenhouse gas neutral, then carbon free. So that's affecting what we're doing. Iowa in 1983 put in a renewable portfolio standard. And they started generating, or now generating 105 megawatts of total renewable and currently ranked 4th in the country. Reason being, they have a huge, really good wind swath coming down from Canada, across the Dakotas, into Iowa, down through Illinois. And there was just a tremendous amount of wind that's been deployed. So if you go over that part of the country now, you'll see just, there's a lot of wind that got deployed out there, and they're getting a lot of the renewable power from wind. But Iowa does not have a CETA type law that's driving them to be that way. They're just doing it. And if you look at what they've deployed, they're different. It's kind of a quote a colleague of mine says, who does a lot of state engagement, and he's kind of talking about nuclear, but his mantra is, if you know one state, you know one state. They're all different. We don't have federal policy for the whole country. Washington's got its different policies in Iowa. But if you look at the two, we generate a little bit of more power demand than Iowa, 8,400 versus 5,700. But we're getting kind of close in renewables. They've got a lot more coal and natural gas, but between their wind, our hydro and nuclear were about the same. Two different reasons kind of drove us the same place. And you can kind of look at this data too. It's basically showing the same thing. We're doing the same thing again. Their wind, we're hydro and nuclear. And part of this hydro, it's a legacy of what was built back in the 30s on up to through the 60s to get all the dams built. So I don't know if you've seen the debates they're having out east about knocking the state river dams down. That'll take that out if that happens. So from an energy perspective, we're going to have to find a way to replace that power if they take it down. There's all the other implications and things people are debating on about whether to take them down or not. I'm not going to judge that, but just if those dams come down here, that starts going down unless we replace it back with something. This picture here is the Columbia Generating Station out on the east side of the state. The only reactor we've got, about 10 miles north of where I live. I can see that plume. That's the reactor here. That's just the secondary cooling that dump its condensate out to keep the plant cool. So why are we thinking now? Why are people considering it? Well, we got carbon-free power laws that are out there in Washington. Other states are looking at them. We're wanting resilient energy grids as the demand goes up. A lot of demand. We need the grid to be resilient to respond to that grid. We're seeing intermittent load balancing. You're seeing solar go on and off. You're seeing wind go on and off. These machines can be used to kind of, when it's coming down, they can come up so you can ride that wave and keep demand. In some areas, you want firm, reliable power generation. If we build that plant, that fertilizer plant, we need to come up with 350 megawatts steady. And you could do it with that. You can also do island mode. So if I have a data center on Amazon, I have a data center. I want to control my own destiny. I don't want to be part of the electric grid. I'm going to deploy my own plants and they're going to power my data center. They can do that. They can also do what they call black start capability. So if you lose the grid, you don't have to have essentially a power coming in to bring your reactor back up. You can bring them from nothing to running full time. And literally there could just be a saturation of renewables. How much wind can you deploy somewhere? How much solar can you deploy somewhere where you just run out of real estate? And you're seeing that talking to people when I was back in Iowa, talking about the wind. Some of the regulators in the state, it's like, yeah, we're about done. And we can't put any more in because we've kind of filled all the land up. We're down that swath. So we're just about done of putting any more in. How much of a solar field could you lay out to power the city of Seattle? A lot of solar panels. So it's just they're getting there. So tell me if this is too simple. Basic fission. Hit a uranium neutron, hit a uranium 235 fissile atom with a neutron. You bust them 2-3 pieces, you get on average 2.5 neutrons come out. You suck up two of their, let two of the, some of them go, and you want one of those to go, make another one, so you keep a critical chain reaction. Fuel looks like this in one of our existing waters. Uranium dioxide ceramic fuel in a tube. The zirconium alloy highly corrosion resistant tube gets made into a square fuel assembly. And about 200 of these get put into a reactor core, kind of a cylinder. You try to get it as close to a cylinder as you can. That's the, ideally a sphere is the best for this, but a cylinder will work. You basically use it to turn a turbine. You make steam, you spin a turbine, you get electricity out. Safety is generated on reactivity control. So you've got the chain reaction going on, you're humming along one, causing as many neutrons coming out. You can pull reactivity out, so I'll pull my control rods out. It'll go a little bit above that, power will take off, drive them back in, level it off. You need to trip the reactor, you drop the control rods, you suck up all those neutrons, and the nuclear reaction goes away. So Fukushima earthquake hit, big earthquake. When that hit that plant tripped like that. Rods went in, nuclear done. There's no nuclear stuff going on. But you got decay heat coming. So a lot of these radionuclides that split are radioactive, they're decaying. They're spitting energy out. You got to get that heat out of there. So you need heat removal, both for when the plant's operating and even when it's shut down. You still got to remove it. So back to Fukushima. Tidal wave came, went over the wall. The Japanese put their diesel generators down low because they got such seismic action. You want that weight down below rather than up here shaking around. They got flooded out. Took out the heat removal. Plant couldn't take that decay heat away. Heated it up, melted, boiled the water off, fuel melted, blew, and you had your meltdown. Then you have the barriers. So you have your reactor, your fuel holding this tube holding the uranium pellets. You have the vessel holding it. You have a containment around it holding it. And all these barriers protect, keep the nasty radioactive stuff inside versus getting outside. So back to Fukushima. I melted the fuel, I burst the cladding, the stuff melted, I had releases of all kinds of good stuff. What I have to say about that, yes, it released a lot of soluble cesium, released a lot of tritium, released stuff into the air, but the vast majority of the really nasty stuff is sitting in the bottom of that vessel. So they got a massive cleanup effort, but the really, really bad stuff that was released in the beyond design basis accident staying in that reactor. Same thing at 3 Mile Island. I'll talk to that one in a minute. So another incident. So what's the evolution? We started with generation 1 reactors in the 40s, right after they got B reactor built over Hanford, for really big sustaining reactors. We kind of had a split where they went to do defense production, and we started looking at what could be civilian reactors, and they looked at a whole bunch of different types in the 40s and 50s in the generation 1 time frame. Down selected to what we call light water reactors. They're just water cooled reactors, cleaned up, purified water, regular water. And a lot of that was driven by the Navy went that way for nuclear propulsion. They went with water reactors, so there was a lot of R&D being done on the water reactors that were proven to work in the Navy, and we took that over to the civilian side and built light water reactors. Most of the Gen 2 reactors, they're all essentially all the 2 that we're operating in the US today are Gen 2s. They were all designed for 40 years. Most of them, there's like 1 or 2 left that have not got a license renewal for another 20 years. And there are a few that have received and others underway to get another license renewal to go out to 80 years. So what was a 40-year design is going to be going out upwards of 80 years. a lot of work goes into verifying that, yes, these things are still safe to run and operate. Gen 3s were evolutionary designs. We didn't deploy any of these in the US because the market flattened and started in the 1980s. And there's Gen 3 plus evolutionary light water reactors. We have built 2 of those in the US recently down at the Vogel site in Georgia. And several of the new ones underway are kind of fit into this Gen 3 plus light water reactor.
What is the Vogel site?
They had 2 units, 2 operating plants of this vintage down in Georgia. And they built 2 more new ones of this vintage. So there's two new big 1,000-megawatt reactors. But if you heard, there's companies, small modular reactors. There's a handful of those. I'll talk those a bit that are of this Gen 3 plus design, NuScale, General Electric, Voltec. And there's the Gen 4. These are the revolutionary machines. Different fuels, different coolants, very different designs that actually capitalize on the work that was done back here and then R&D that was done while these were getting built. So, sodium cooled reactors, those were looked at in the Gen 1 time frame. Gas cooled reactors were looked at then. But we didn't have the technologies. We didn't understand the materials well enough to really want to pursue those industrially. And now we're at the point where, yes, these can come out. We actually got the data where we think we can deploy these. The big drivers. So what are we looking at in terms of safety? Got to protect public health and safety. There's active, inherent, and passive safety controls. Active, I need to turn that diesel generator on. I need to get my coolant going. I need this pump to turn on. I need this valve to open up. I need this. So the machine has to do something to get that coolant going around. Inherent, it's, can I design stuff to work on physics? As an example, the sodium cooled fast reactors, or why I say fast, they're a different spectrum of neutrons. The light water reactors fission well on slow neutrons, so a neutron will come flying out at about 3 MeV of energy. Basically, what you do with a light water reactor, it's like playing pool. The one ball hits the other one, that one stops. So you take all the energy out. So I smack it into a hydrogen atom. Hydrogen atom flies away. My neutron is really slow, and then it can cause fission. With a fast reactor, they're good at just get the fuel real close together, and then it'll fission on the fast spectrum. It's just how you design it. But what those reactors do is when they heat up, there's the material expansion coefficient, the fuel and everything will kind of move a little further apart. And that'll let neutrons go out of the core and not cause fission. So you can actually control safety by just the physics of the reactor. And they did 2 tests on an experimental reactor in Idaho where they turned off the flow, just turn it off. And the reactor heated up and the power went down. And it basically took itself into a stable configuration. And they did what they call loss of heat sink. They just said there's nowhere to dump the heat to. And pulled that off, the reactor did the same thing. So you design them to be able to rely on physics. The other option is rely on natural forces. Just natural circulation. A lot of the plants are using natural circulation to avoid having to turn on an active pump. I can turn my plant off, I dram the control rods in, and I step away from it, and it's just natural circulation is going to take over and keep that thing cool. I don't have to flip a pump on. So they're using, the newer ones are using a lot of combinations of inherent and passive safety to make the newer designs. We have a heck of a good track record on the Gen 3s. There are a lot of active systems, but these newer designs can even be better. And what will that give us? Well, let's step back. So our current power generation, about 95 plants operate in the country. We got demonstrated safety, except for the 3 Mile Island accident, which that one was an interesting one. And you hear talk about automation versus human control. What they found out with that one in the 1970s is they had a very small leak. And the operators didn't figure it out right. They couldn't read the indication, so they kept overriding it and basically caused the water to go out of the core. They melted the fuel. They had what's called a partial meltdown and melted the fuel about halfway down before they figured out what it was. So there's a lot of work that was done in human factors, getting the operators to understand what they were seeing. There's a lot of work in controls and just culture, and it's kind of like, leave the darn thing alone. It'll trip itself. If it sees it's doing something wrong, let the machine do it. It's how we've designed it. So besides that accident, we've had really good safety. We've driven capacity factors up over 90%. So while that plant is running, or over a year, you're getting over 90% of it dumping power to the grid at its rated level. So it's a 1,000 megawatt plant, you're getting a 1,000 megawatt plant 90% of the time. You refuel about every 18 to 24 months. So if I got a 2-year refueling cycle, I'm running at 90% or over for 24 months, just straight deliver power. Real high reliability, they're carbon free, they're firm, secure power. So a lot of dependability to the grid with this kind of plant. Kind of the downside, they take a lot of water. Thermodynamics catches you here. You got to dump 60% of the heat of the fission out. So they're always typically by big bodies of water. And one of the challenges in the summer with a lot of plants is the rivers can get lower. And just the heat you're dumping in it can cause issues with that river. So they'll often derate the plant down so they're not overheating the river. And in fact, there's a couple in France that are on smaller rivers they've actually had to turn off because they would just overcook and overheat that river, so they shut them down.
They absolutely need to use fresh water?
No, they're on the ocean.
No.
So I'm never going to bring seawater into here.
Yeah.
So I could bring seawater into here. So I can use it to get my condenser. So I go through my main turbine, spin it, I'll condense the water down on the primary side, and this can be seawater. In fact, the plants I worked at in Florida operated just like that. They bring seawater in to be the ultimate heat sink.
But so you're condensing water that was already fresh water?
Yeah, this is fresh. So I'm on a primary side, I got my reactor, I make steam, spin a turbine, run it through a condenser, make water, pump it around. So this all stays inside. And then I've got a secondary system. Some of the other plants will have a secondary side. So I'll have a primary side with the heat exchanger right here. So the water will just stay in the reactor. I'll have a secondary loop that does the turbine and does that part. But the bottom line is I'm making one reactor type we use for light water reactors called boiling water reactor. It boils it in here, takes the steam out. The pressurized water reactor, this is all pressurized, so it's liquid all through. Then I have a heated big steam generator on the secondary side. I'll boil the water in there to make steam. But it's just spinning a turbine, and that's even the new ones. That's what we're doing. We want to spin a turbine and make some electricity. I think that is plant by San Diego that they've shut down since then. It's a San Alfred plant down by San Diego. And that's one they worried a lot about tsunamis after Fukushima. And you looked at all the surveys, and it's like that plant can't get hit by one. It won't. They might get hit by one, but you'll never get one big enough to pop over that seawall. All right. So what is an advanced reactor? And there's typically a lot of confusion on this. Everybody thinks advanced reactor, SMR, small modular reactor, because that's kind of got to be the buzzword. So in reality, there are kind of three types. There's the big, large ones that run typically 300 megawatts to 1,000 megawatts. These tend to be built on site. So you're going to bring in all the pieces. You're going to put the reactor together and just basically do a big construction, build the whole thing, get it up and running. Small modular reactors run about 20 to 300 megawatts. And the idea with that is I can do a factory build on the reactor, bring it out and plop it in modules and get it up and running. one of the fundamental differences between this is how we're set up in a lot of states where we do energy is, if I'm building this reactor, I can't recover any money for like ratepayers until the thing is up and running. So I've got to wait till I deploy, spend all that capital to deploy 1,000 megawatts before I get a dime back, and I have to borrow all that money, and on the interest, that gets really expensive. So the idea here is to build what you need to, put a module in, and start generating power, getting revenue, put your second one, put your third one, put your fourth one in, so you can, you're not taking off such a huge capital hit at the beginning. The other idea they're looking at are micro reactors, down about 1 to 20 megawatts. You can almost think of them as a battery. Their idea is, I will build in a factory your micro reactor. You want to, I'll come pour a concrete pad. I'll drive it out in 3 Connex boxes. I'll put the reactor down, I'll put the secondary side down, and I'll put the control, I'll plug it all in, and you'll run it for 7 to 8 years, some are about 10, doing about 1 to 20 megawatts. And when it's done, I'll come pick it up, take it away. It's the business model. May not work as well as they think it is. But again, they're small. So people like data centers are looking at that. Mines are looking at that. Hard to reach places where it's expensive to bring fuel in, communities in Alaska.
Still up to
Whatever, yeah. Maybe not one. Depends on the size of the data center. I might need to build 2 or 3 of them. And then have a spare, or do whatever so I can keep it going. But, some of them are even looking at these for data centers. If they're big enough, I might just need 2 small modular reactors at 70 megawatts. I can get what I need. So they're all kind of looking at, what's the best fit. The electricity coming out of these studies have shown will be more expensive than these. But if you're deploying this somewhere where you're replacing natural gas, you got to bring it through LNG or something else that's really expensive to begin with. That might be the trick. So, to provide electricity on Washington's power grid, that would not be a way to do it. So just some of the designs. So I mentioned Vogel, a very new deployment. It's down in Georgia, Gen 3 plus, 1,000 megawatt plant. They built 2 of them. They cost a boatload of money. They were expensive to build. They came in 3 times over budget and probably 10 years over schedule. So these started getting built in 2008, 9. They just got turned on last year. They tried to build 2 in a place called Summer Plant in South Carolina. And they ended up bankrupting Westinghouse and somebody else. And it just, they just, and when we started building these, I said, God, we need to get Summer and Vogel built close on time, close on budget, and then things will take off. They didn't do it. They were nowhere close.
Was that like an operational problem?
It's just, we in the US, and you kind of look at it, we have challenges building mega projects. Any mega project, they're delayed, they're expensive. What's the one they did in Boston, the Big Dig? Building underground, it was just expensive. I think if you look at where they put the viaduct down here, we just have trouble building mega projects, and I think we did here. So that led to the new developers' idea of, let's do this small modular thing, let's do factory build, let's do what we can and get them in quick and try to get revenue on it. This one, New Scales, they're actually out of Corvallis, Oregon, company that's spun out of Oregon State. Really cool idea, but my take on this one is they still got to build a big civil work up to nuclear code. Building something to nuclear code with all the safety on it is a heck of a lot harder than just building a building. Nuclear concrete, you say, is really expensive. kind of like you heard of Pentagon toilets, $500 for a toilet seat. We're kind of like that. But there's reason for it, we got to be safe. So the other side is some of the advanced reactors that are underway. And a lot of these are being supported by DOE's Advanced Reactor Demonstration Program. It's basically a 50-50 cost share between government and industry to get these new reactors deployed. How this came about was there were a lot of people, labs and industry and everybody saying, we've done a lot of R&D work. We know how to build these. We just need help. Congress, US government, take some risk off these so they can get a demo done. We're all talking and Congress finally went, all right, we're calling your bluff. Here's your check, go do it. And now it's like they're kind of like the dog who caught the bus. Like, oh, and we got to do this in 5 years. So there's real heavy drive on these two. So Natrium is a sodium cooled fast reactor. As I mentioned that earlier, that's one really cool. Sodium goes through fast neutrons. There's been a couple of experimental reactors done, 2 in Idaho, 1 in Washington, over by my side of the state. So there's a lot of test and demo reactors that inform this one. So they're going to build theirs in Cameron, Wyoming. There's been a lot of drive to, can we put new nuclear at retiring coal stations and capitalize on the infrastructure? We need water. We need to hook them up to the grid, because it's almost as hard to build new transmission as it is to build a nuclear plant with all the environmental laws, the permitting, getting the land rights to go. So they're going in there. This company, X Energy, is building what they call a high temperature gas reactor. And they've got a unique fuel design. It's a carbide fuel design. There's been a lot of studies on it and work that the stuff is like extremely durable. You got to take it up to about 2250 C to get it to do anything. So the ability to handle high temperatures, the ability to be able to handle accident sequences, and that ball will contain everything within it and won't melt. So they're looking to build. They were going to build over in Eastern Washington when this started, and they decided that no, they cut a deal with Dow Chemical, and because of the electricity and high temperature, they're going to site that by a Dow Chemical plant in Cedar, Texas. Use that to power that plant. Eastern Washington's looking at with these guys to be like a fast follower. If the one's built in Texas, then they might start looking to site one over in Eastern Washington State, where we already have an existing reactor. There's a handful of other ones that are being looked at. They're kind of down, less close to deployment, that are getting some funding. There's one interesting one that's kind of coming its way up. These two are going straight to an NRC license to build their commercial machine. It's a company called Kairos Power. They have the same fuel that I just talked about that can get really hot up to 2250, but their coolant's molten salt. So they're running a molten salt pebble bed, what we call a molten salt pebble bed reactor. And they've got license. They're going to do a couple of test machines and get data from that will inform their license they'll take to the NRC, because they recognize this thing these two have a decent experimental basis. This thing has little. So the company's taking a proactive approach to get some data figured out and then go through licensing.
Is that the same type that they have running in China?
China's got more. There's another one we're looking at. It's called a molten chloride fast reactor. It's basically molten salt with dissolved fuel in it, so it's a liquid. And you just, I go back to my drawing where I had my one loop. That one loop is just salt coming into a core, and it gets into a critical configuration core. You get fission, you get heat in it, you pump it out, and then it goes subcritical. You take it to a heat exchanger and make the water cycle. So they're looking at those in China. We actually have an experimental program under this, but there's a lot of other companies that are interested in this concept. So there's a lot of work being done looking at molten salt. This technology actually fits into our forte at PNNL, because we got our stars, materials and chemistry lab. This thing is less of a nuclear problem, it's more of a materials and chemistry problem. You know, if you got liquid fuel, physics is easy. The nuclear physics, I don't have pins, I don't have to do all kinds of funky stuff. I just got a homogeneous solution with fuel in it. That physics calculations is really easy, but salt likes to eat stuff up. So how are you gonna maintain that thing? All right. What are the challenges of some of these? And again, it's talked about capital costs. There's one here, it's an interesting one, capacity accreditation. So one thing utilities have to do is called resource adequacy. Is I as a utility have to be able to demonstrate that I have sufficient capacity to provide my customers power on the most cold day, on the hottest day, whenever they're going to be demanding it, I can provide it. And you have to know kind of what your plant is when you do these assessments to say, all right, I can count on this plant for 500 megawatts for 75% of the time. We don't know with these new things, so it's hard to say how do you figure these into those type of assessments. So I want to deploy nuclear and meet my resource adequacy constraints. There's questions with cost modeling over 60 to 100 years. For reactors, we really don't know a lot about. And that's part of those demonstrations is can we get those through and get some data on it. We have a dearth of construction. There's challenges in the fuel supply chain. We got most of our, there's a lot of uranium, I think you were talking about it earlier. There's a lot of uranium in the US. There's a lot of uranium in Canada, a lot of uranium in Australia. There's a lot of uranium in Russia, a lot of uranium in Kazakhstan. So the US kind of shut down its domestic mining, and we shut down our domestic, what they call enrichment. And on enrichment, so uranium ore is about 99.5%, 3%, uranium-238, the rest of it's U-235. You have to get that U-235 content up because that's what you want to fissile. So if you hear enrichment, that's what they're doing. And if you hear what the uraniums are doing, that's what we're worried about the uraniums doing. Because once you can get up to about 5% U-235, you can go up to wherever you want. So that's why we watch it. But we kind of gave that business up in the US of mining and of enrichment. And we're trying to bring it back. And we got more anxious to bring it back after the Russian invasion of Ukraine. We shut down all interactions with Russia. It's like, oh boy, that supply just went away. We got to figure something out. So there's a lot going on there. So what are the benefits? Modular design, factory built, scalable. I can feed my data center with a few or a bunch. I can do underground construction to get rid of some of the seismic constraints. I can build it on a smaller footprint. And given a lot of the safety features, I can have smaller, what they call exclusion zones. So when you're building one of these, you have to plan for what are you going to do if there's a big event. So with some of these big reactors, with a lot of that active control, our regulators said that exclusion zone can be 50 miles in radius. So you, the utility, have to plan for what you're going to do with everybody within a 50-mile radius. That means you typically got a site in the middle of bloody nowhere where the power's way over here. With these, they're much safer. So the NRC is allowing you to collapse the exclusion zone. And, it's just not as bad. So some of them, they're saying the exclusion zone could be at the plant boundary. And that really makes life easier for how you have to plan because, you're not expecting to get that catastrophic accident. You're not expecting to anyway. They're versatile. They can be flexible. They can load follow, so they can go up and down. They can ramp quickly. The existing reactors, you have to go up really slowly so you don't stress the fuel. These things can move fast. They can black start. I talked about that. They have real short refueling times. Some of them have no refueling times. I got a molten salt reactor. I'm running a loop. All I got to do is drip in some fresh uranium and then have something on the other side cleaning it up and purifying and getting all the fission products out to keep it going. So I can even keep it running the whole time. So they do use less water. There's actually some of the designs they're looking at like natrium, they can possibly do air cooled. So I could get away from even having water. All that opens up more siting options. I talked about the fuel. This is what TRISO looks like. Here's the fuel kind of in here. A couple layers, 2 or 3 layers of highly non-porous material. And this thing is the size of a tiny little kernel, like a seed, tomato seed, tiny. And you put a bunch of these into a ball of graphite. And you literally put them in and you float gas through and they just kind of float and you just move them up through the core on a pebble bed. Coolants are improved efficiencies. I can have simpler containments because I'm operating at lower pressures. The less reactive and corrosive. You know, liquid sodium is not corrosive at all. No problems, it burns in air. So if I get a little crack, I got an issue. So a lot of this are covered in argon gases. And fewer redundancy. This is a bit old, but this is our current fleet. What this is showing is when each year the license expires. So if we would stay with our current licenses, by roughly mid-century, we will have lost that 20% of our energy generation. Since this was published, a few of these curves, they've actually relicensed some of these, so they're out here. So this curve's gonna start shifting that way, is more and more of a license. So the completed ones, when I finished this, I talked about, these are going out to 80 years. These are the ones that are going under renewal, or under renewal for 80 years. And I've got that thing here, Vogel 3 and 4 just went online. So that's our existing fleet. Our new fleet, I talked about, NuScale was going to put their facility or their first reactor in Idaho. That project got canceled. Got canceled, not safety, it got canceled because there were too many people worried about whether they're going to be cost overruns. So they could not get the municipality subscriptions, they could not get them. So they couldn't get enough people to buy the power, so they had to cancel the project. GE Hitachi and the Tennessee Valley Authority are pursuing putting one at the Clinch River site. Holtec is pursuing an SMR at the Palisades site in Michigan. Palisades is an interesting one. That's one that I talked about earlier. It was shut down for economic reasons. The company that bought it, Holtec, with everything changing, they're like, we want to bring that reactor back up. So they're trying to relicense the existing reactor and build a new one. Talked about TerraPower in Kemmerer, Wyoming, X Energy in Texas, Kairos, the test reactor side. There's a couple more on this. So they shut down the 3 Mile Island plant in Pennsylvania. And then now they're going to want to restart that one just to provide power to Microsoft. There's talk of restarting a power plant, a nuclear power plant that was shut down in Iowa to provide power for data centers there. So plants that came down are starting to get talked about re-upping. Whole bunch of projects underway. Project is an interesting word here. It's really not. There's just a lot of agreements, memorandums of understanding. Let's do feasibility assessments. Let's look into this, but none of these are contracts. No one's cut a deal yet to say, hey, build me one of these, except for the couple I've showed you. States are active. A lot of things are changing legislation-wise. There's laws being changed to put value on carbon-free electricity in these states. There's financing and tax incentives going on in some of these states. So again, every state's different. They're going after the climate side. They're trying to incentivize based on money. We got states that are doing, there's a lot of prohibitions in place that were put in place in the 80s and 90s. So there's states that are overriding the prohibitions against nuclear energy. And I had the pleasure of actually going to the legislature in Illinois and just to talk about it, kind of like I had with you guys. And it was, part of it was, and the congressman that sponsored the bill understood it. He's like, you know, we have to figure out what we're going to do in Illinois. And we can't even talk to somebody because a utility or a developer, because we have a law against it. They aren't even gonna, they don't even want to talk to us. So until we get that overcome, we can't even have that conversation. So that's kind of why they did it. And a lot of these other ones are doing it. Minnesota's still on the list of having a moratorium. They got close a couple of years ago to lifting it, but they just couldn't get it over the line. There's still a few that are in play here. A lot of stuff going on within the states looking at it. A couple of federal working groups. This is a NARUC, is the National Association of Regulatory Utility Commissioners. I forgot what the NASAO, National Association of State Energy Officials. So these are kind of state folks looking at it. National Conference of State Legislatures is looking at it. These are states that kind of have feasibility and working level groups that are looking into, would advanced nuclear work in their state. And these are some of the feasibility studies and things that are underway as of last spring. So a few of these have moved around, but there's a lot of motion ahead. And I've mentioned coal to nuclear. A lot of states are looking into that transition. Can they repower their coal plants as they shut down? And I'll leave you with this. There's a huge wealth of information on my colleagues at Idaho National Lab that run the Gateway for Accelerated Innovation nuclear program. They've got tremendous amounts of literature and talk much deeper on what I'm going through here. And whoop, hit it again, darn it. Must have that mouse right by that. And last, there's additional resources to the Department of Energy, the Nuclear Regulatory Commission, Electric Research Institute, and Nuclear Energy Institute. There you go.
Yeah. That was sweet. I had no idea about the liquid fuel. That's really cool.
It's funky design. Yeah, they had there's an experimental reactor that was ran in Oak Ridge National Lab in Tennessee, molten chloride fast reactor. It was ran in the 60s. It didn't run very long, but it had really good performance attributes. And again, we didn't know that we couldn't control the material properties. There's a lot of stuff we couldn't do. Now we can. So it's like, well, let's take this design and see it. And one thing that the molten salts can do too is I could start with uranium, and instead of taking uranium to breed plutonium, I'll bring thorium in, and I'll breed uranium. So I'm not getting up to thorium, and it breeds in a kind of less proliferation, risky fissile element, and you can run a thorium fuel cycle to do it versus a uranium plutonium.